So welcome everybody to the last in our series of circular table talks brought to you by We Don't Have Time and the Nordic environment company Ragn-Sells. I would like to ask the viewers to download the We Don't Have Time app so you can engage with today's wonderful speakers and the 65,000 strong We Don't Have Time network. Since July last year, when we aired our first episode, we've been on a whirlwind tour of amazing ideas, incredible solutions, and fascinating people who are all playing their part in building a better circular world. I must say we've had a lot of fun planning all these and making these shows, including today. And we hope our audience has too, while also getting a glimpse into a new concept on the way we run our economies in far more environmentally friendly, circular ways, where waste is consigned to the history books and everything is a resource. This final episode in the series comes just days before governments and scientists and business and civil society meet in Sweden for Stockholm Plus 50. And this is 50 years after the UN Conference on the Human Environment, when the world was first glimpsing that many environmental issues were going global and regional. So 50 years on, we know the drivers of damage and the levers for change. And today, business and industry are stepping up the challenge, not least through the United Nations Race to Zero, as well as cities and all sectors of society. I think governments at Stockholm Plus 50 need to really internalize the climate and environmental science and the risk assessments that are among the jewels that have been built over the last 50 years. I would ask them to be courageous and to take courageous long-term decisions on behalf of us all and our only one Earth, which was the message and the slogan 50 years ago. I think governments should also see from the broadcast like this one that the world is ready and is already supporting a positive, sustainable transformation so urgently needed right here and right now for all of us and everyone to come. And that often the missing link needs to be no regret policies of governments that provide certainty to those taking the big and innovative steps and the risks, like our wonderful guests here today. So let me introduce Per Larssons, my co-host. He's been my co-host throughout the series. He's head of sustainability at Ragn-Sells. Per, what's our theme for the final episode?
Thanks, Nick. And yes, this is the last show, Circular Table Talk show for this season. So we come back to that. Circular economy needs to also transport goods and people continuously. And to be honest, we need to transport even more going forward when we're going to keep our material loops going and not waste the resources. So today we are going to deep dive into the massive world of logistics, or more important, fossil fuels free logistics. And some talk about the last mile, others talk about the first mile. In short, it's about how we can transform the way goods arrive and then are delivered into businesses, shops, but also homes. But also how the waste generated is more intelligently taken out of our communities and together in ways that have drastically lower carbon footprint, reduce traffic congestion, and help build greener, more livable cities.
Great, Paul. Thanks very much indeed. The broadcast will also look at people, by the way, because many of the solutions involved also include how, as humans, we move around, including how we bridge the sustainable mobility divide between cities and rural areas, and within areas of urban places that are underserved or under-resourced. First, we're going to begin with the Nordic region through the lens of the Beloved City initiative, and then we hope maybe to pivot to a little bit more regional and perhaps even global on these matters. To help viewers get into this topic and, in a sense, to warm up our wonderful guests, let's look at a short film made by the BBC about what is happening in the host city of Stockholm Plus 50, in Stockholm itself.
Normally, bin lorries start their journey empty, pick up waste and return to the depot full. And delivery lorries with all those parcels we love start their journey full, drop off the parcels and return to the depot empty. But all these journeys are clogging up our cities. So what if we combine the two jobs? That's what's happening in Stockholm, Sweden.
Normalt så är det här två separata flöden, avfall och gods. Det vi gör i älskade stadsamarbetet är att slå ihop de här två flödena till ett, som gör att vi kan hantera både gods och avfall.
People fixing the world.
At the depot, Simon's loading his trunk with the day's deliveries. Then he takes them to homes and businesses around the city centre. But instead of coming back empty, he picks up the recycling.
So we go full in and full out with parcels and waste.
It's part of a plan to cut emissions and make the city nicer to live in.
We have more and more people and freight that need to move around on our streets. And at the same time we want to use our streets in another way, focus more on people and pedestrians.
So a parcel company pays a waste company to do the final leg of the delivery.
Ni har sett ett samarbete som går över gränser med olika företag som normalt inte jobbar med varandra. Det har varit ekonomiskt lönsamt från dag ett utan några tillskott stödpengar från andra håll.
As a result, 3 bin lorries and 3 delivery lorries have been decommissioned and replaced by electric vehicles. The waste company says this has cut its CO2 emissions by 74%. But to really solve the problem, should we all order fewer parcels?
I think people in general need to be more aware of the negative impact on their local environment when they buy something online. So maybe perhaps people should stop buying 3 sweaters and send 2 of them back, and like being more aware of the transport that's actually generated.
Good. That just watching this film reminds us that for many ordinary people, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought home just how many packages and stuff, well, at least in the richer countries, we are now buying online and having it delivered to the home. And I saw a report by McKinsey and the World Economic Forum and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, who estimates that last mile deliveries in urban areas will increase by more than 30% by 2030 in the world's top 100 cities. And without action, carbon dioxide emissions will reach perhaps more than 25 million tons a year by 2030 related to this. And traffic congestion, which is a right pain, as we all know, will increase by more than 20% if nothing is done. Okay, let me introduce our first guest, Professor Mattias Lindahl of Linköping University in Sweden. Mattias, you are a top international recognized scholar in the area of eco-design and product service systems. You've conducted research and teaching in eco-design since 1977 and research and teaching in integrated product service engineering. He's going to share some of his ideas on what a sustainable city needs through this lens of logistics and transportation. Mattias, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nick. Nice to be here. Not since 77, but 97. But I've been doing this for a long time. Thank you very much.
Great.
Yes, I will talk about this, and I would start to state that the future is more than just new technologies. We all want to have a convenient life, a life where our needs are solved easily and smoothly. However, today it's not just about the quality of life. Our cities also, and we, need to urgently power up action dealing with big existential threats like rising resource scarcities and climate change. Not forget that as a global community, we have less than 10 years to halve our emissions to get net zero by 2050. In the old days, we had to produce the food and products that we needed to survive. But now we live in a society where we are buying most of what we need. Things have been transported over quite long distances, sometimes from places we don't even know about. We are also buying and using more things than ever, leading to an increased need for transports. And added on that, if we want to have a more circular economy, we also need more transports, as Per just mentioned. Transports that cause environmental problems, which is something we don't like to have in our society. We want to have a good society. Okay, we need to rethink. The question is how to solve the issue. The Beloved City initiative you just saw a movie about is a good and inspiring example. However, when rethinking, we need to keep in mind what Peter Drucker once stated. The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it's to act with yesterday's logic. And it's a risk we do that if we don't stop, have a thought before we start to act. So it's important not just to act. Instead, the starting point we should be considering is what is the right thing to do, what is effective, and then focus on doing that efficiently. But we have a tendency in society of focusing on just improving things that we already have, instead of thinking, is this the real thing or the best thing to do? The thing is that otherwise, if we don't do this, it's a risk that we are solve symptoms and sub-optimize the systems that we need to modify and change. In my presentation, I will focus on logistics-related issues and not on all the other means that could be used to reduce the need for transport. For example, changing buyer behaviors, have smarter product solutions and so on, fewer parcels, etc. I would put that aside, focus on the logistic. In order to move forward, it's always good to remember the past, but we have a tendency to, in our modern society, to forget about that. But we live in a society that changes, sometimes very rapidly. An example is shown on this picture that you can see here. And the thing is that just in a few years' time, the cars and trucks took over the scene from the horse carriages that earlier had been predominant logistic and transportation means on the streets of New York City. Before the takeover, there were not only problems with bringing in the feed for the horses, but also environmental problems related to removing all the manure from the city center. It was a real environmental problem at the time. Then, with the cars and clean trucks, they were clean, or they considered to be clean. The problem was solved. Nothing was left on the streets, and they thought the logistic problems were solved forever. During the last 100 years, cars and trucks have helped to form our society, enable our cities, the ones you are living in now, to grow, but now we also see the negative effects. Back in 1998 to 2001, together with a research colleague, I studied the ongoing trends in society related to the automotive industry and how that would affect the industry as a whole. What you see now is a schematic picture of how the world automotive producers were already at that time squeezed from three directions, as seen on the left, and how that, in combination with emerging technologies, could give birth to new emerging mobility solutions. During this work, that was really interesting, I had contact with many automotive companies, for example, Toyota and Honda, just mention two of them. Already then, they had ongoing work on how to improve the world and transform society into a hydrogen-based society or electric society. In this work, they also invited their competitors to join. So they had joint projects. And the reason was that they saw that they need to collaborate. They couldn't do this transition themselves. During last year, a huge amount of money has been spent on developing new technologies related to the electrification of vehicles. For example, batteries. I think you know about this. However, even back then, Toyota clearly stated that the new technology was just one of the things that needed to be in place to really make a transition. This was something we also saw, and it was very apparent. To succeed, you also needed to, for example, ensure that the laws and other types of regulation allow the new technologies and business models that might need, might need new, and you also might need new ways of collaboration, ownership, and sharing. Furthermore, but not at least, you need to guarantee the infrastructure needed for fuel. For example, that the grid can take this new load if you have electric vehicles, and that you have the charging station network in place. Because without that, customers will not move in the direction you want. These things take time to change and build and are often not in the control of the companies, since it involves regulation and laws, and that take time to change. This little figure illustrates an electric car sharing model. In line with the previous slide, if you want to make transition and real change, you need to consider various dimensions of change. You can't just look on the technical part. As I see it, a lot of these dimensions are not properly considered and managed. And that hinders and slows down the so much needed improvements we actually need in our society. On a broader level, like in the Beloved City initiative, we also need to consider how we structure our logistics networks, regardless of how we power them. The logistics in cities must be done in a smart way that avoids empty and low utility rates of transport. We need to really take advantage of the new techniques that we develop and use their full capacity. For example, use information to reduce the need for transport, for example, by sharing and working together. We need new business models and also collaboration models. We need to take advantage of the fact that electric cars are more silent, and that also opens up for an opportunity for their use during the nights and evenings. This enables us to spread out the need for infrastructure over the day and may also lead to a lower need for infrastructure. And that is good, because to build infrastructure, to maintain the infrastructure, causes environmental problems as well. The ongoing electrification and in the future, self-driving vehicles will also create possibilities for future improvements. For example, that we can share vehicles in a smarter way and therefore need fewer in our society. Less infrastructure. And electric vehicles will also be able to play an important part in society's electric grid as a backup and also an effect balance function. However, once again, all this will, in many cases, require modifications and new laws and regulations. For example, how companies can collaborate, how to share and own things. And these things are not in place so far. Okay, I will stop here and once again quote Peter Drucker. He stated, "The relevant question is not simply what shall we do tomorrow, but rather what shall we do today in order to get ready for tomorrow." Now it's up to you. What do you need to do today to get ready for tomorrow? Remember, the future will come. I hope that you want to be prepared. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthias. And as a German pop singer once said, sharing your things instead of producing, instead of a client, you'll get a new friend. So maybe friends are worth something too. All right, good. We're going to go to a panel here with some guests. And let me first introduce Stig Fiali, who is concept manager and head of key account management at Ragn-Sells in Norway. Stig is in charge of the Beloved City concept in Oslo and Trondheim. And then we've got Sofia Sundberg, who is CEO of Barkarby Science. Sofia collaborates with businesses, local government and others to test and bring sustainable innovations to fruition in Barkarby, which is another Beloved City initiative. And she also lives there. So, I mean, she sees it as a resident, which is also kind of useful. And I mean, she sees innovation through a human-centric lens. And then last but not least in this panel is Tobias Orbunder. He's Nordic Director of Bring E-Fulfillment, which is a logistics company and part of Posten Norway Group, which has actually reduced its emissions by over 50% in the last decade, which is really fantastic. Okay, Stig, let's go to you first. Tell us what's happening in Oslo. Tell us what's happening in Trondheim through the lens of our theme today, and how far are you getting down this journey to fossil fuel-free logistics?
My knowledge with the rest of the world. First of all, I'd like to address a little bit about the goals that we are heading towards working with the Beloved City. And if you go to the less emission goal, we will say that we have completed that because we have actually converted all the vehicles to fossil-free vehicles. So we are really proud of that. And then when it comes to the less noise, it's also a big part of reducing the noise level in cities, which has also been actually improving a lot because electric vehicles are much more quiet and silent than regular trucks, which is also good for the climate in the city. And when it comes to less traffic, we go full in and full out and full out and full in. So I mean, doing actually working on the yield management, which is very famous for logistics, it's really actually showing us significant results that we were not able to actually fantasize about years ago. So very interesting. Improved atmosphere, I would say, to contribute to a vibrant city. I feel that we have managed to do that. A more better place for people to be in actually the city by actually reducing the traffic. And then cooperation. I would like to address that as well through collaboration. And that's why I want to build a little bit on the collaboration part, because it's a very important enabler if you want to achieve this type of, what shall I say, business model as beloved city. Because one of the important enablers is you need to have a clear strategy. That needs to be supported by all partners. And then, of course, the defined business model need to be shared and agreed on, because we are playing with open books in terms of business models. We are not hiding any issues. Guidelines regarding corporations is really important to get in place. And not at least that you have to allocate resources, all the partners into this, and that into the functions of, for instance, sales and marketing, communication, operation, health, environmental and safety, and not at least finance. So it means that you are building a more or less of a kind of a joint venture, but not being a joint venture, but you are actually adding together resources in the pool, which actually benefit the corporations a lot. And then, of course, joint operations by having people working on the same plant. These are the clear enablers to succeed with Beloved City. And then I would like to share with you some findings from the survey we conducted among the employees in the hub, which is quite interesting, because the highlights they're actually focus saying is that the cooperation in the hub and among partners are really good. They really, that's actually stands out as a highlight for the survey, and not at least that the engagement among the involved employees as well. So people find it very motivating to work in a new way and actually establish a legacy for the society, and then it's a meaningful work. And then promotion and publicity has been really key, working with the various people in marketing and communication departments. It's because getting out, they're reaching out to the politicians, reaching out to the companies, it's really important, and also via social media. And then, of course, we have areas of improvements, and one of them is the time. It takes time for Ragn-Sells to build a market, because unlike Bring and Posten, they have all the parcels. For them, it's more like they can move the hub to a hub like Beloved City because they have the volume. We need to build it greenfield. So that means that for our part, it has taken a longer time to build the business because we're doing a greenfield business. It's not something we acquire. So if you look at it from an investor return on investment point of view, you will see that the return rate period is longer, but at least you're contributing to, you get it actually more of a return in terms of brand recognition, which is also a good investment. And then, of course, availability of vehicles fitting the needs for operations. That's one of the biggest challenges for us, because when you enter into this business and you want to industrialize the operations, you want higher volumes. There you see that it's very hard to find the equipment. And then, of course, help and assistance from the municipalities. We move faster than the politicians. And we are then what we call early, we are the innovators, and we need them to be the early adapters. So
you're the early adopters and they need to be the early adapters.
Yeah.
Just hold that thought there, Stig. Hold that thought, because we're coming to a panel session, and so I'm just really kind of getting snippets from people at the moment before we go to a chat. So hold those thoughts there. That's really good. Sophia, you live in a beloved city, right? But you're also a professional person in the life of the city, as well as being a resident. Tell us a little bit, in a sense, about what is actually happening where you are, and how do you feel that things are developing in terms of creating a more beloved city through the lens of transport and logistics. And don't forget the autonomous bus, because I want to bring that up.
Yes, absolutely. It's not
Aha.
the beloved city concept yet, but this is something that we're looking into. The Barkarbystaden, where I work and live, is a whole new city that's being built on an old airport. So this is one of the largest city development projects in Northern Europe. And it's being built on an old airport, and everything is coming up from nothing and new things. So it, of course, needs to be done in a sustainable, innovative way. And the municipality where this is, just outside of Stockholm, has also signed something that's called a climate contract. It's called Viable Cities, and this municipality was one of the first 9 in Sweden to sign this contract. And that says that by 2030, the municipality wants to be climate neutral. And then, of course, we need to look at different innovative solutions to get to that goal. And one of the first things that Barkarby Science was a part of is the autonomous bus that you mentioned, Nick. And that was in 2018. So it was the first in the world that was autonomous, running on a schedule. And then the project has been developing along the way, and a longer route. And now you can actually, it's on demand. So you can order the bus to different places within this part of the city, and then be dropped off at another specific part of the city. So that's just one of the things. And lessening the greenhouse gas emissions is, of course, a big part in this. And transportation and logistics, they are a big part of the greenhouse gas emissions. So if you can lessen that, that has a very big impact. And we're also attracted by parts of the solutions where it's less noisy, less vehicles on the streets. And I think one of the operative words is what you mentioned in the beginning, Nick, when you said courage. We need to have courage to look at new types of business models and new ways of collaboration. And that's why I personally love the Beloved City project, because it has a lot of courage, people, new companies working together with new business models, finding new solutions. So yeah, that's one of the things, one of the reasons, or several of the reasons why we're looking into the Beloved City as a model for our new
super
city
secure.
that we're building.
Just park those ideas for a moment. Tobias, this issue of collaboration, right, and businesses, different businesses working together to deliver on this kind of environmentally friendly logistics, if we can put it that way, and hopefully one day totally fossil fuel free logistics everywhere. Did you ever imagine that your kind of company might be working with, say, a waste company like Ragn-Sells? We don't call Ragn-Sells a waste company anymore, we call them an environmental company, but the materials they are dealing with are what people in the past might have thought of as waste, which we see as, of course, as a resource now. Tell us a bit about that kind of unusual relationships.
Yeah, it was not an easy decision for us when the question come. Of course, we have bring high goals for sustainability, and of course we need a various of actions to reach our goals. And of course, the obvious is to change our car to electric and biogas. But collaboration is one important thing. But we never thought that we're going to collaborate with a waste company. But should we remove our cars and go along with our parcels with collecting in waste? It never crossed our minds. But I'm really glad that we took the step and have the courage to say yes to Ragn-Sells. And I think I sort of a breakthrough was when we created the independent brand Beloved City, because that solved a lot of dilemmas for both of us. And make sure that we can get in other companies in the future and now, and it could be different companies that collaborate in different cities, in different countries. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the platform to getting further on with the.
Wow! So we could see Beloved City as a brand that starts going around the world, which would be an interesting idea. Yeah. So good. Let's have a few questions here before we go to the next part of the show. Per, you've got a couple of questions you want to ask, yeah.
Yeah, I think that people are so polite here. Everything looks like it's shiny and everything works, but I know we have just 4 cities that are not doing it. And I believe that we really need to make sure that we have the policymakers taking action. Someone needs to enable it happening. We need to have procurement in place. So I would like to touch about that as the first question, especially Stig. What is the challenge? Why doesn't we grow faster? Is it the location, or
The challenge
what is the reason?
there is actually to find the location, fitting the needs of beloved city. I believe Tobias could agree with me on that. That's the biggest challenge so far, and we need to work on that. But also, one big challenge is that we need to find the equipment that is also working for the mission. So there are 2 challenges actually.
We will have a transport company that are supplying trucks later on in the show, and maybe they can enlighten us. But definitely, I will say that I really hope that we have policymakers listening here. You need to enable that we have the city hubs if you want to have fossil-free transports.
But I, let's just, for the viewers, right? I mean, they've seen the BBC film, but give me one thing. What's one big block, right? What one policy would free up this thing? I mean, it's hard to pick on one, but anybody got any thoughts on that?
I think it's going to be the will that you really want to do this and really want to focus on it, because I think in the past it has been the financial how we're going to finance this kind of collaboration, but now we have solved this, because this is the first thing I have ever seen that stands on its own financial legs. It's not funded by state or city, that you're combining different freight flows. So I think it's unique, and we really like to talk about it, and I hope someone steals the idea, because that's what we want. We can't do it in every city, so I hope. You always say waste and you always say parcels, so hopefully someone steals this idea, and we will be glad to talk about it and get the information from us how you do it.
Sophia,
did I hear correct? There was no cost, so there's no cost for the society with the collaboration between Bring and Ragn-Sells?
No, it stands on its own financial legs and financed by the Ragn-Sells and Bring, and it's a good business for both of the companies. Otherwise, we haven't grown from Stockholm to Malmö and Trondheim and Oslo that we did the last 2 years.
To get some simplicity here, there is clearly an obvious saving in the fact that you're not both running vehicles around the city, right? I mean, you're obviously running things independently, but you're running things together. So in theory, one truck or van or whatever it is that comes in delivering parcels also picks up the waste and takes it out again. So that's reduced one vehicle movement, as it were. But does it go beyond that? Is it just saving on halving transport movements roughly, or is it something bigger than that?
It's taking away cars, but also it's efficient, because it's not 2 persons that go being on 2 different hubs. It's one person that otherwise from Ragn-Sells or otherwise from Bring that can deliver parcels, but also collected waste from companies and can go into the hub.
I was quite interested in what Sophia said about the autonomous bus that they have in Barkarby, because of course, if you go way back in time, you know, when there were horses that we were talking about earlier, I mean, they used to carry people, they used to carry goods, they used to carry all kinds of different things in a kind of mixed way, a bit like what you're doing with parcels and waste. And so can you imagine, Sophia, the autonomous vehicles in Barkarby picking up people, but also picking up parcels and picking up other things? And do you know what I mean?
Yes, I think that's a really thrilling, exciting thought. And I think that this is, like they mentioned before, this is a platform. And it's going to be very interesting to see what else can be put on top of this. What other types of solutions can be found that you can add as layers on this. So this can be like the base, and then you can add things on top. I can't say for sure, but I mean, it's a very thrilling, interesting idea to maybe explore further. But like Per said, there is a challenge with finding a place to be. And when you're building a whole new city, it's maybe a question about priority or understanding the greatness in the solution, the opportunity that it can mean, everything that it can entail. But I think that's one of the things that really intrigues me about this solutions. What else can be put on top of it? I think that's a great way of thinking about it.
Do you have systems there whereby parcels come in and waste goes out in the same vehicle, or are you going to be looking to talk to Stig and Tobias about this?
We are already talking about this.
I can imagine. Yeah, guys, I think we need to move on. And thank you very much indeed. That was very interesting. Matthias, come back to us. You probably heard what everybody was saying. Sophia and Stig and Tobias and Per. Brief thoughts.
I think the beloved city is a very interesting concept because it actually shows how different actors that normally not worked can actually start working. And that is why I also think it's important to stop looking on the current value and supply chains. Instead, try to look on what could be a value network where you connect different capacities and information. And I also think it's important that you focus on, like they are trying to cut down the number of units used, and also try to improve the load, the useful load that you're bringing out from the city, and also try to make less transports in the future, because we are sometimes moving just air and space, and that is not really something that brings value. So I think they are a good step, but I do see they will be able to do more in the future. So I think this is very, very useful. And it's also useful with this type of inspiring examples that are easy to explain, people can relate to. So good, thumbs up.
Thank you so much, Matthias. This is the end of part one of the show. In the second half, we will look at heavy logistics and how to green this part of the supply and logistics chain. But before, we would like to introduce and hear from a special guest whose transport solutions cut across a lot of those issues we are addressing today.
Great, thanks, Per. Let me bring in Chris Schneider, who's the CEO of VIA Europe and the CEO Chief Operating Officer of VIA, who is coming in from New York. VIA has a unique on-demand technology and micro-mobility solution that is revolutionizing the way companies, cities, schools, and citizens are accessing sustainable transport, while also bridging the rural-urban divide. Chris, are you with us?
I'm with you.
Super. I hope you heard the introduction there. And Chris, tell us a little of your technology and your journey, where you started and where you are today.
Sure. So VIA builds software that allows cities and public transit providers to operate accessible, efficient, and sustainable public mobility services which are powered by data. Our partners, our cities, use our technology to fill gaps in the existing transit ecosystem, but also to create new and innovative alternatives to private car trips. So how did we get here? 10 years ago, our founders realized three things. One, even in cities with great public transportation, huge numbers of people still drove their private cars to work. In Berlin, for instance, which is one of the most efficient public transportation systems in Europe, almost 50% of people drive their cars to work. Two, suburban and rural areas presented a huge challenge for traditional public transit modes. And these are areas with significant levels of what you might think of as mobility poverty. So in the US, for example, 45% of Americans don't have access to any public transportation, which is incredible to think. And third, at the start of the 21st century, public transport, which is a multi-trillion-dollar industry, was still running almost entirely on technology that was invented in the 17th century, which is to say fixed routes and schedules. So the idea behind VIA was that technology could have a huge role in solving these challenges. And when I say technology, what I mean is specifically smart algorithms that can create efficient transport networks based on real-time demand. So across the last 10 years, we've pioneered a new category of technology called transit tech. And today we're working with over 500 cities across 35 countries to enable our transport partners to solve a number of challenges. First, creating on-demand bus services to fill transit deserts in suburban and rural areas, upgrading legacy paratransit services with a modern user experience, digitizing school bus services, and enabling new and intuitive ways to actually plan transit networks and streets. So all this, of course, built with incredibly smart algorithms, but maybe what's most important is the bottom line impact for cities, which is expanding access to mobility in a sustainable and an equitable way.
So, Chris, you heard a little bit about this beloved city initiative concept. I mean, on the simple level is you've got a waste company and a post office, basically, or a logistics company linked with a post office, in a sense, sharing vehicles rather than actually having their own, in a sense, if I can put it in very simple ways. And obviously there's a lot more to it than that, because it doesn't just end with that. I mean, I'm sure with Norwegian Post, it's the same with DHL in Berlin. There's bicycles, electric bicycles, and other distribution networks going on, but it's a sustainable, good start. And also with Sofia in Barkarby, which isn't a beloved city, but looking at it, how would you imagine your technology and what you've been doing could fit into these kinds of developments?
Nick, I think that fundamentally the beloved city concept and the technology that we're building are sort of based on the same premise, which is you have vehicles with some space inside it, and you want to utilize that space as efficiently as possible so that you need fewer vehicles making fewer trips. Now, one way that our technology can affect the same outcome, in a sense, is by funneling people more efficiently into existing public transport networks. So, one of the huge issues in people transportation right now is the congestion that you get when people are driving their private cars into and out of cities, and that's what creates rush hour, creates obviously terrible air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, also wastes a tremendous amount of time that people could be otherwise spending doing productive things or spending time with their family. And all of these people are driving their cars with 3 or 4 empty seats. So one of the kinds of services that we've enabled all over the world are first and last mile solutions that predominantly work in suburban areas where people live too far from a train station to make it convenient to use that train to commute. But if there's an on-demand shuttle that can take you very efficiently to the train station, then you can take that short trip, take a high-speed train or a bus into the city, use existing public transport or perhaps another network of shuttles on the other end, and skip the part where you're stuck in traffic in the middle. We've have services in Doha, in Qatar, for instance, where they've started a new metro system, and 50% of the demand for that metro system has come from first and last mile systems that are powered by our technology. Similar story in Seattle, where we're doing the same thing in a number of transit deserts. So I think that's one kind of, pretty similar analogous approach to people transport.
I think in a sense you've covered something I was going to ask you about, which was about the climate change angle, because what I get from hearing and what you say, Chris, is that basically by reducing the kind of private person in a private car going from A to B and everybody else in a private car and a private person, somehow creating a kind of sharing economy, in a sense, of transportation, one intuitively would be reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Is that correct?
I think that's right. And if you think about the climate crisis and the journey that we have to travel, right, the solution can't simply be to electrify every private vehicle. On the one hand, that would take far too long. We don't have enough time to decades to
good plug for us. Good plug
You're
for us.
welcome.
We don't have time.
On the other hand, by the way, electric vehicles take 2x the production emissions right now that ICE vehicles do. But on the other hand, if we ended up with just as many electric vehicles, private vehicles, as we have now, diesel and gas-based vehicles, we'd still have the same congestion challenges. We'd still be living in cities that were clogged. So, every trip that can be taken in a shared mode and ideally public transport is a huge win, I think, in the direction of sustainability. Of course, if you can combine that with electrification as well, then you're kind of hastening both sides of the equation. And so we have a few examples of services that are both electric and serving this first and last mile or sort of more core public transport need. Milton Keynes is a great example. There was a grant from the Office of Low Emissions Vehicles for about £500,000 that helped fund electric vehicles to run a suburban bus service powered by our technology. You can go to South Florida, where we're working with a big train operator called Brightline to run a fully electric and shared first and last mile journeys to train stations, so people don't have to drive their private cars. So I think we need to take a everything, all of the above approach, in a sense, to sort of electrification.
Let me ask you one final question before we go to the second part of the show, and do stay with us afterwards, which is, as we've heard from my dear friends in the Nordic region, in the end, policy is a big deal, right? And you have this, I think, quite fascinating technology. We didn't talk about the rural suburban thing because, I mean, as a kid, when I grew up in north of England, you could always see buses, but by the 70s, the buses were disappearing, right? And the communities all went to private cars. And so that's when I first heard about VIA, was listening to a BBC broadcast about the rural on-demand service that you're running. But let's park that for a second. What's holding you back from taking over the world with this brilliant solution? To put it mildly.
So I'm not sure our goal is to take over the world, but let's pretend that it was.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, that was maybe a bad example, yeah.
One, obviously, it would be great if there were more funding programs for innovative mobility solutions. So that would be one obvious thing. I think there are regulatory challenges to recognizing on-demand public transportation in slightly smaller vehicles. In England, this is certainly a challenge. So there's a regulatory aspect.
What is that, Chris? Tell us what that is precisely.
Essentially, if you're using a vehicle that has less than 8 seats, it's not public transport. It's by definition a taxi, and that seems awfully silly when you can potentially, it might be much more efficient for a local council, local authority to provide rural transport in vehicles that have 6 seats, or you don't need a 15, 20, 40 seat bus to provide transport there. But there's one other layer, though, I think, which is there's increasingly huge numbers of programs to fund specifically green or sustainability initiatives around electrification, for instance. So in the US, there's a huge push, especially with the new infrastructure bill, to electrify school buses. But if all you do is electrify the school buses, but you don't invest in technology to route them more efficiently, which might let you use fewer vehicle miles or even fewer buses to transport the same number of children, then you've missed an obvious opportunity to build efficiency into these networks. And so I think, one slightly more nuanced ask would be couple these investments in green energy technologies with smarter ways of using the vehicles, the infrastructure itself.
Got you. That's a really interesting insight. I hope everybody else enjoyed that because it's another aspect of this. Obviously, this is more focusing on the human movements, but I mean, I suppose in the end, whatever the technology is, also has relevance to moving heavier things and parcels and other things like that. So thank you, Chris. Stay with us. We're now going to go to part 2. So welcome to part 2 of this wonderful show of the Circular Table Talks, talking about logistics, environmentally friendly logistics, fossil fuel free logistics on our way to a better world. People talk about the last mile. I also read, because I'm not an expert on logistics, that there's something called the first mile in terms of bringing back waste into the economy. And it's not the whole logistics story, because what we heard earlier is part of a vast web of national and international networks of road and rail, of air and sea transport that connects us into the cities and other final destinations such as rural areas. And these crisscross continents and nations and continents. So it's a bigger picture out there. We certainly can't cover the lot of it. But in this section, we want to look at some of the interconnections, especially in respect to catalyzing low or zero emission heavy logistics. We've got some speakers here on a panel, and let me introduce you to our first speaker. It's Jonas Wiebom of Ragn-Sells, who is involved in the pioneering circular ash to salt projects. I think I need to mention what that is to the viewers, or else they wouldn't know. But this is a very new development that we've actually showcased on a previous episode. And this is taking fly ash, so ash from the incineration of things like household waste. And instead of sending everything to landfill, they're actually harvesting valuable salt-based materials from this ash that are needed by industry and agriculture. So it's a new way of bringing back materials into the economy that are used for farm and food production, and also other projects that would have gone to landfills or would have been requiring more virgin resources. And these often come from faraway mines or production facilities that have a heavy carbon footprint. It's a bit complex, but you need to know that it's a very interesting new development, but it needs logistics to support it as well. Okay, a long introduction. Anna Pernstol is Head of Partnerships and E-Mobility with Scania, with a focus on their new electric trucks for heavy logistics. And then we've got Åsa Peterson, who is the CEO of the Swedish Energy Association, basically representing some 400 energy companies, both private and public, whose focus on today's show is through the lens of electric infrastructure. So I'm going to open my first start to Åsa. Let me ask you, is Sweden's energy infrastructure able to match the ambition of the electrification of heavy logistics, let alone all the other challenges that come with that?
Well, that's a really good question and to the point. And I mean, with the need that we see, it's not. That's the simple answer. I mean, we know that electrification of the transport sector is the solution for decarbonizing transport. And today we see an incredible acceleration of e-mobility in Sweden, especially in cars, but with the heavy duty transport now really hitting ground. If we look at the car side, every third new car will be electric in 2022 in Sweden, and by 2030 we expect to see 100% of new sales of electrical cars. On the commercial vehicle side, here we expect to see a 50% sales of new sales by 2030. That's what the industry themselves says. But of course, this is all conditioned by the fact that we have access to the infrastructure. First of all, the charging points, but the charging points also needs to be filled with electricity. Today, as a country, we face actually a doubling of the demand of electricity, fossil-free electricity, until 2045. So of course this is a big challenge for Sweden as a country, but it's also a huge opportunity to meet this demand and really transform both transport that would need around 25 terawatt hours in 2045. That's what we see today. Today, just as a note, transport sector consumes 3 terawatt hours, and that's then all basically consumed today for trains. So, I mean, this is all growth that we see due to the electrification of both passenger cars and commercial vehicles. And then we have the whole industry transition on top of that. So here, of course, Sweden as a country needs to build a lot more production, but we also need to massively strengthen the electricity grids. So when it comes to charging infrastructure, and especially then fast charging, we need very high energy to charge both cars and heavy transport. It's up to 1 megawatt that we would need, for example, in a fast charging station for a truck. So here we see that we need to address this capacity challenge in Sweden, strengthening the electrical grid along our roads and in our cities, also to supply these hubs that we've been discussing here today. And in order to do this, we need to shorten the incredible slow permit processes that we see today when we build infrastructure in society. So we can expand the electricity grid at a much faster pace than is possible today. And we also need to use the grid more efficiently, because maybe we don't need to match the grid capacity exactly with the actual need, because there is also technologies like smart charging and control charging with which you can control charging over time, and also apply more flexible grid connections. And then there is, of course, the whole possibility in energy storage, in batteries or in hydrogen, for example, that is a lot discussed today. So there are a lot of opportunities with which we can meet this, but we are not there now. So we need a major effort here in society together. Just also picking up on one very interesting aspect here that Chris brought up, if I may, how to plan these electrical or this electrification of transport. Because if we just electrify the current routes, I mean, maybe there are, today, if we plan it on the current routes, and then with all these changes we see in the logistical systems, these routes will of course change in the future. So where to start this electrification and how to meet this challenge while the transport system is also changing on the logistical side, here the answer to that is collaboration, close collaboration between the energy sector, the transport sector, and together with the planning, of course, in municipalities and together with politicians. We need to open books, all of us together, and do this together.
Exciting. Okay, so let's go to Anna. I had the pleasure of interviewing your CEO in Glasgow at the UN Climate Conference last November, where we were discussing fossil fuel subsidies, but we're not going to raise that little ghost today. But tell us, electrification of trucks. Scania, you're moving very fast on this. You have a science-based target. You're on the UN Race to Zero. You're with the Exponential Roadmap. You are really walking the talk as a large company in this area. How's it going?
It's a tough challenge, but it is going well, I would say. As you said, we have signed up for the science-based targets, and that means that we have signed up for reducing the CO2 emissions from the use of our products with 20% by 2025 already. So that's really a tough challenge, but we are determined to reach the goal. And to do that, we at Scania have a very progressive product plan, and will increase our portfolio of electric offerings every year. But to achieve this goal, we really need to start now. We cannot sit and wait for the optimal product in the future. And I think the collaboration that we have with the Ragn-Sells that are operating in this new ash to salt plant, they will operate an electric regional heavy transport, and I think that's a great example of where we can take the next step in electrifying heavy transport. But to follow up also on what Åsa said, we cannot do this alone. We need to collaborate both with our customers and the customers' customers, the transport buyers, but also on the infrastructure side and the electricity and energy side, providing the green energy to the sites.
Okay, good. Let's go to Jonas now. So critical to your circular economy and climate change ambitions are your inventiveness. I've done many shows with Ragn-Sells, and I'm amazed at all the clever things they're doing with the waste streams and the circular economy and bringing stuff back into use. But climate action is also about supply chains and logistics. Now, you've got Åsa here and you've got Anna. She says they're happy working with you. You're happy, obviously, working with them. But do you need more collaboration? Where are the gaps right now in this, Jonas?
Of course, we need the chargers. This transport is with ash to salt plant is so ideal for electrification, since it's visits only a few places. We have maybe 4 or 5 heat and power plants that we should take these ashes with the electrical truck, and we unload them at only one place, being in the new factory. And also there's quite short distances, maybe 80 kilometers and shorter than that. And the critical factor for making this so interesting is that the trucks that are used here, it's dry bulk trucks, sort of dry tank trucks. It actually takes like 45 to 60 minutes to load them, and then it takes 45 to 60 minutes to unload them. So we can use that time for charging. Charging time is of course the main drawback with a battery vehicle in ordinary case. But this requires some sort of collaboration also with the customers, the heat and power plants. They must supply electricity, and also we need to have a charger at their plant. But since they are also electricity producers, they're quite susceptible to this solution. And when we took this idea to Scania in the beginning, they confirmed that this is actually an ideal transport for electrification due to the short distances and the loading and unloading time.
Okay. All right. Let's bring Chris back, and let's bring Matthias back, and Matthias back, and Per is still with us. Matthias, let's just first start. You wanted to say something to Chris, right, about what he was saying before, and could you just, maybe fire away on that one?
Yeah, I will take it very, very short. What we already saw back in the time 20 years ago, actually the technology was a driver for the automotive industry to change, but they also saw the electric cars will force them to change the business model, and actually in the way that they were thinking, and they still are thinking, stop selling cars.
Okay.
Because selling cars is not a good business, especially if you have electric cars.
All right,
because
park that idea, Matthias. It was getting there, and we'll bring you back in a minute. Okay, Per, you come in here on your question.
Yes, coming back to that, to the first session also, you talk about the ideal situation. It means that it's just to do it. But I guess there's now problems. We heard from Åsa about the possibility to get the electrification. Scania, you're now launching your new truck in the collaboration with Ragn-Sells. But to be honest, what do we want politicians to do? What do we want to happen? That I would like you to more elaborate on.
Is it a question to all, or?
I think we need to Jonas and Åsa and Anna right now, I think. But let's you can come on that in a second, Matthias. What do you want governments to do, is Per's asking, yeah? Åsa, Jonas?
Yeah, if I may go first, I think I was already pointing to that in my presentation. It's really about the permit processes. It takes way too long today to get a process to build an electrical grid or to build a wind park. Here we need to, as a society, decide and prioritize. We have set a target in Sweden to be climate neutral by 2045. But then we also need to have the processes in place to support that target, to make it on time. The Swedish government has actually presented this electrification strategy, which I think in a way is actually unique, because here the government has been speaking to industry, transport sector, energy sector, and put together a list of measures that need to be fulfilled in order to be able to meet this doubling of electricity demand that we're facing as a country. But we need speed to start delivering on those measures that have been identified. We know what to do, but we need to put pressure behind it and resources. Sometimes it's quite simple. There are not enough people working in the bureaucracy to make this happen.
Right, and this is in Sweden, right? This is not in a poor developing country where, you know, money is fantastically limited. This is in one of the wealthiest countries in Northern Europe, right? Okay, that's a good point. Matthias, you were trying to make an interesting point to Chris before. Maybe have another go at that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not sure where to start, but what we saw then back in the time was that the driver is, when you change into electric cars, electric motor is much more durable. We need less service. We have the trend towards automotive cars in the future, vehicles, the batteries, etc. So they saw that you also need to change the business model and stop selling cars, because that will not be profitable in the future. And they will then also be able to take advantage of the knowledge, the information they are collecting. So, for example, what you highlighted, Chris, to use less units but provide more value, to optimize the load, shorten the distances we transport things, and also improve the flexibility. So a lot of drivers that goes hand in hand in the way we want to move. But the problem is up in here, it's our mindset. So especially among guys like me and maybe Per, sorry to say, but we are old bastards. We are thinking in the old way. We want and still think we need our car in order to use it. But in the future, that will not be the trend or what people want. And also globally, we are in the mega cities. People can't afford to have an own car. And the cities can't afford, because they are already now emerging heart attacks or traffic attacks. So
what's the question? What's the question, Matthias? What's the question? Is it an observation or a question?
No, it's an observation, but it also goes back to the fact that politicians need to start actions in changing how should we should we encourage people to start changing the mindset. And ways to do that is changing the tax system. For example, here in Sweden, it's preferable if you own your car instead of renting it. It's also how companies are taxed, ownership rights, sharing rights, etc. So a lot of the legal systems, but also how people are calculating when they're buying cars. And it's also about regulations, because there are regulations hindering companies from collaborating. If Volvo and Scania start to collaborate with some electric energy companies, that would be no-no according to competition laws and so on. So there are a lot of things that are
absolutely, Matthias.
That the politicians need to take care
of. Chris, do you want to come back on that? Anybody else want to come back on that thought? Can Scania work with Volvo, or is that not allowed, or I don't know? Chris, any thoughts there?
I mean, on the mindset and the mind shift question, I think Matthias is absolutely right. But, I would also, speaking from a position of privilege, there's some of us who might choose to drive their car because it's more convenient or more comfortable, and there the challenge is, can we provide you with a mobility solution, and maybe make your car more expensive to the point that your kind of tipping point for your personal preferences kind of changes. But let's not forget that there are many people, and maybe not in Sweden, but certainly in the US, that have no choice but to buy a car. And so they spend it's the second largest expense in a household for many families that don't have access to public transport any other way, and they would rather not have to have a car. It's extremely expensive. It's money they could spend on food or education, and there I think we have an obligation in a way to provide a better option.
What about this? Anybody else got any views on this point? If you want to say something, Jonas, you might have to. Yeah.
But I can say something about that. I really agree about the mindset change. I see that we have, talking about circularity, I think there are trends going in the same direction. When we shift from mobility or transport from owning the truck or owning the car to mobility as a transport, that also invites to more circular business models, and we can optimize the vehicles for being sustainable and high quality, because it's not selling the truck but selling the kilometers that this high quality truck can produce. That is the thing. So I think that's a positive trend, and I also see that electrification can really be the leverage that can push us in that direction. So I'm super happy and excited about that. But there are indeed behavioral changes needed, both from the private person side, but also the companies need to change behavior, both going into circularity and transport as a service, but only going into electrification. And I think Jonas brought up this example with the Ragn-Sells, where they charge while loading and unloading, and I mean, we cannot expect taking transportation as it is today and just electrify. Probably we need to change maybe how long we stop, how the routes look like. Electrification and charging will be one part of the operation to a high extent, and needs to be taken to the logistics planning, and we need to be open to that.
Why is Jonas, comment on this.
You actually want to just combine your original questions with the other speakers, that maybe one should look at the subsidy systems, where in Sweden they are often linked to investments in maybe an electrical car, but maybe you should have some construction where it's usage instead, maybe to remove the electricity taxes on energy that is used to charge an electricity truck. Since one of the advantages with our solution is that we are looking to use this truck for maybe 120 hours a week, and thus it's replacing 2.5 ordinary trucks, and all the resources needed to build a truck, and not least the battery, will be much better used in that way, and we also will spread out the usage over 24 hours, 7 days a week, and making it less congested traffic. So I think that's one way for the government or the authorities to actually help us here.
Matthias, I can see you're chomping at the bit to say something.
Yeah, I think what Jonas was just talking about, I think is important, is also to have this system thinking. And the government should have more of a system thinking when they, for example, are acting with the public procurement. Not only buying transportation, for example, buses, but also consider how can they, by buying this type of new solutions, optimize and reduce the amount of needed infrastructure in the city, balancing out the need for other environmental related activities they need to do in order to prevent and hinder cause environmental problems. So I think they need to have this overall perspective instead of just picking here and there. And I think it's also up to the companies to be better in showing this type of broader solutions. And also that also needs collaboration. And to add on that, I think we should not talk about supply chains or value change. Value change. We should talk about value networks. They're much more complex than the traditional ones, and that needs collaboration, but also new ways of sharing values within those networks.
We're getting close to the end of the show. I would say that I have 3 kids, and they're all in their 20s, and none of them own a car, and wouldn't dream of owning a car. So I think there is a generational thing here. Chris, I wanted to ask you one quick thing. Are there any other innovations in your pipeline that these people would like to know about? And one quick question, are you going to go for on-demand electric trucks in the future? That was more a tongue-in-cheek question.
That's a great question. It's not currently in the pipeline, but maybe I'll tell you about what is, and this is building on, I think, Matthias's point and the discussion around systems, which is one of the newer parts of our portfolio, if you want to think about it, that way is a set of planning tools. So we purchased a company called Remix about a year and a half ago. They make some amazing products, one of which allows you to plan transport networks in a very, very efficient digital way to make it collaborative with citizenry, so you could get comments on where this bus stop or that bus stop, and make it a much more community-oriented process. But there's also an element of that product that allows you to design streets, and I think one of the big movements, especially across, I think it's been accelerated across these pandemic years, has been rethinking how we use our streets. And it's the 15-minute city in Paris, it's Barcelona's superblocks, and when we're thinking about retrofitting existing cities, whether it's with the beloved city concept or to be more focused around people and walking, and not giving up so much of our street space to vehicles, but actually to lives and to human beings, to be able to reimagine a street network for public transport and bikes and walking, but not so much the private car. That I think is an increasingly important piece of the overall picture, because you can bring individual a bike here, a logistics platform here, but I think it's really imagining how that will all fit together. So that's one very important direction, I think.
Per, any question you want to ask our guests? A kind of final question, maybe.
I think that we can really summarize this with one word: collaboration and collaborative skills will be crucial going forward. And we're not there yet. We have a linear thinking. It means that we just maximize the profit short term. So that's the big thing. And then I believe definitely we talk about the system thinking. It's coming back all the time. How can we make it happen in the society? How can we have the policymakers understand not to regulate things, but to enable things to happen? So again, collaboration. So let's meet all around the table. We talk about circular table talks here. So why not make sure that we on every show has policymakers, not maybe for them to answer questions, but to listen and to learn and then to act. I think that I take this as the closing remarks, I believe. And I think it was great to have all speakers speaking about the problems, the possibilities, but also about the need of collaboration.
Good. And I must say I learned something. I never really thought about logistics before, and I've been involved in the environment for donkey's years. And I've always, cities, green cities, it always seemed to be very simple. But now I realize there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. So I think, again, you need to expose these concepts to policymakers. So look, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to Per, my co-host and moderator, or maybe I'm his co-host. I don't know. It works both ways. Thank you. It's the end of our series on the Circular Table Talks. I want to thank everybody who came on at the beginning, everyone who's been on in the middle and the end for being with us. And please look out for We Don't Have Time in June, where we will be broadcasting from the Space Arena in Stockholm for Stockholm Plus 50 with 6 days, I believe, of 8-hour programming on all kinds of issues of what's facing our world. So thanks very much for taking part. Please check up on what we're doing, and goodbye.